I welcome you to a discussion on balance of power and balance of terror. Balance of power in international politics is a situation where one state or a group of states limit the power of one other state or another group of states. This situation is a situation of relative peace where the parties do not immediately go to war with each other, but preparation for war goes on. Diplomacy goes on, propaganda continues, and armaments pile up. This is a situation of relative, temporary, and very fragile peace which can be disturbed by an upsetting of the balance. How the balance is got upset? When one of the members of a particular group or one of the players in the game become more powerful or perceived to have become more powerful than others, then others try to carve its power by tactical war, by preventive war, and thus war begins. This is a stability which is vulnerable and which can at any moment become unstable. The whole idea is based on a concept of equilibrium, where the contending forces, if they are of equal or nearly equal force, we have a situation of temporary equilibrium. But when one of the contending forces become more powerful or become more forceful, then this equilibrium is developed into another dynamic situation, another dynamic equilibrium, where a new configuration of forces take place and a new equilibrium takes place of the older equilibrium. So, the balance of power system promises stability, but we have to understand that stability in international politics is only temporary and very vulnerable. It is a dynamic kind of equilibrium where stability may at any moment turn into instability. Balance at any situation may turn into imbalance. The second promise which the balance of power situation makes is that there is a great inequality in distribution of power among the states, and the smaller and weaker states can hope to retain their independence when rivalry between the great powers is at a high pitch and when there is a balance among the great powers. Thus, buffer states can hope to retain their independence when they are caught up in a balance of power situation between two rival powers, or small powers on the borders of bigger powers can enjoy the protection of the bigger powers. But history has enough evidence to prove that this may or may not be true. Now here we have a great story told by Thucydides, a famous Greek historian. He tells about a situation when several hundred years before the birth of Christ, Athens and Sparta, two great city-states of ancient Greece, along with their tributaries, were locked in a big confrontation. Melos, a small island, was near to Athens but aligned to Sparta, and the Athenian representatives went to Melos to offer them a tributary relationship. The Melians were a proud people. They valued their 700 years old independence and they pleaded that they can remain neutral, but they did not want to be a tributary of Athens. Now the Athenians told them in very clear terms that in this world the powerful does what they can do and the weak accepts what they have to accept. So the millions had to accept the tutelage of the Athenians. The Athenians were of course defeated in the next war with Sparta, but that is another story. The point is, the small nations, the weak nations, cannot always survive in this situation, though the balance of power promises their survival. So the point is, the balance of power promises first stability in international politics, but we have seen that stability is very vulnerable. The balance of power promises freedom for the weaker states, but we have seen that this promise may not always be fulfilled. So what the balance is all about? Why the balance is so vulnerable, so fragile? Why the equilibrium, instead of being static, is so dynamic? The answer lies in the real ground reality situation. When there are two or more players in a balance of power situation, it is absolutely impossible to assess one's own power in relation to the power of others, because power is dynamic, whether it is narrowly conceived in terms of military strength or broadly conceived as in terms of societal strength. So, there is always a chance of error in judgment. There is always a chance of miscalculating the power of the self and the power of the others. So what the states do in this situation of great ignorance of each other? They do not know who is more powerful in the game. So they always try to keep a margin of safety between them and others. When they try to keep this margin of safety, they try to increase their own power ceaselessly. This is called the security dilemma. So, this is a situation where competition for power, for maximization of power goes on, and arms race goes on. Diplomatic confrontation and propaganda war goes on. So this is a situation which justifies the ceaseless pursuit of power. So in one way, balance of power is a peaceful situation. If we look at it from another angle, balance of power is a situation where the states prepare for war. This is the basic reason for creating the dynamic situation where one balance becomes upset to bring in another balance. The players are not permanent. If we look at history, some great powers disappear and other great powers come in. The players change, but the drama goes on. This is a situation of balance of power which promises peace, but we cannot have peace under a balance of power situation. So, the situation is such that it is very, very volatile. The balance of power concept, as a concept, especially the concept of balance, came with the mechanical revolution. The point is, the mechanical revolution came along with many other revolutions, like the development of the capitalist mode of production, and most importantly, with the coming of the modern territorial state in the 16th century Europe. Lawyers argue that in 1648, with the Treaty of Westphalia, the system took a final shape. It created modern states. Now, the modern states, they related to each other in war and in peace. The point is that there is no Leviathan over and above the modern states. The modern states were conceived by Hobbes as Leviathans, the largest fish which eats all the smaller fishes. But in international politics, there is no Leviathan. So how the states interact with each other? They interact as sovereigns, as independent powers, and in their own interest, which later came to be known as the national interest. So the states interact with each other on a conceived or misconceived level playing field. I say misconceived because the states are not equal in powers. Some are more powerful than others. And the powerful players, they try to dominate all others. It is argued that the balance of power is required or is an instrument to stop this domination, to stop any one state to become a hegemon. If we look at the context of balance of power systems, we see that the balance of power systems have developed in Europe right from the 16th century, and it is still operating. But the theater of operation had changed. Till the 19th century, the basic theater of operation of balance of power system was Europe, because till that time, the European powers were the greatest powers on earth. Perhaps from one part of Europe, the balance has shifted to another part of Europe, but it remained basically a European system till the end of the 19th century. Now, with the 19th century, other players were joining in, and this became apparent in the period between World War I and World War II. When Japan had joined in, the Soviet Union had joined World War II, and the United States had joined World War II. The United States were outside Europe. The Soviet Union was only partly European. Japan was the first Asian power to join the game. So after World War II, we see a situation where only the United States and the Soviet Union became two superpowers, two major players in an almost global system of balance of power. The Cold War began. Even after the end of the Cold War, Russia remains a great player in international politics, and Russia is not simply European even after the denouement of the Soviet Union. So, the trend is the balance of power system was a European system, remained a European system for long years, but ultimately transmuted itself into a global system. In the process, we see another thing. The number of great players operating in the system were reducing. Before World War I, there were 7. Before World War II, there were at least 5. After World War II, they became only 2. And after the demise of the Soviet Union, some argue that there is only one superpower. Another trend in this system is that as the balance of power system has become global, has shifted from Europe to almost all over the world, there are minor balances. By minor balances, I mean local and regional balance of power systems. They always have existed. Now, the major balance and the minor balance is entwined in a very complicated manner. Now, the minor balance of power systems, they are allowed to operate without any hindrance if they do not interest the great powers. The greatest example is South America. The continent of South America, when it became free and independent of the Spanish and Portuguese colonialism, came under the influence of the United States. And through the Monroe Doctrine of the early 20th century, the United States had virtually prohibited the entry of other great powers in the South American politics. Now, South America has its own local balances. For example, there is a problem between Argentina and Brazil. There is a problem between Brazil and Uruguay. But these problems do not come up on the global stage. The whole situation was one of insulation. This insulation was first broken when Premier Khrushchev of the former Soviet Union had placed missiles on Cuba, and USA found itself in a very vulnerable position in 1962. After that, through relentless negotiation and pressure, the Soviet Union had to withdraw the missiles, but Cuba remained a socialist state, and its relations with the United States remained always strained. Only recently, it is showing some signs of improvement. The South America in general is out of the global balance of power. But there are some local balances. For example, the relation between India and Pakistan is certainly became a part of the global balance of power system when in 1954 Pakistan chose to enter into military treaty relations with the United States. Pakistan became a part of the global confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union. Nehru complained that it has brought Cold War to India's doors. But yes, the situation since then has changed. But the point is, this is an example of a local balance of power system becoming engulfed or becoming a part of the international or global or the major balance of power system. So the balance of power system has a very, very long history, a very complicated history. Much of global politics can be described, can even be explained in terms of the global balance of power situation. The balance of terror is absolutely a product of the nuclear age. When the nuclear bomb was dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima in 1945, the world was completely stunned, shocked, and a sea change had taken place in international politics. Now we have an unthinkable, unthought of weapon of mass destruction which can not only destroy the enemy but can destroy the self. It has created a situation where it cannot be used. It can either deter or destroy. Between deterrence and destruction, there is no other option. So the nuclear power, the coming of the nuclear power, the United States was the first state to become nuclear, but the Soviet Union soon followed, and technological innovations continued. Other types of bombs were tested, and nuclear weapon system proliferated. This is a very serious problem. But before going into that problem, we have to understand the basic difference between balance of power and balance of terror. In the balance of power system, territory, the economic development of a particular power, the armaments, all counted as basic elements and factors of national power. But when the nuclear arsenal came in, all other factors, territory, alliances, economic development, all became irrelevant. I give you an example. At present, there are 8 or 9 nuclear power states. Some of them are very highly developed superpowers or great powers like the United States of America or Russia. But think of Pakistan. It's a small state, it's a weak state, not very developed economically, but it is a nuclear state. And as a nuclear state, it belongs to the nuclear club. This is a new situation. Only great powers could become members of the balance of power club. But now smaller powers with nuclear arsenal like Pakistan and Israel can become members of the nuclear club and can enjoy the veto power. For example, the world is very, very concerned about the possibility of use of nuclear power either by Pakistan or by North Korea, which is considered to be a rogue state. So this has created a new situation in diplomacy where the nuclear power states, especially the bigger powers, they are now trying to contain the proliferation of the nuclear weapon systems. With the coming of the tactical small nuclear weapons, this has become almost impossible because these tactical weapons can at any time fall into the hands of the non-state actors like terrorist organizations and they can use them. There is a black market of fissile material as well as the technology of making bombs. This cannot be fully controlled. The great powers are very worried over it and they are trying to contain the system through a series of treaties, injunctions, negotiations. For example, they have recently been successful in containing Iran's desire to become a nuclear weapon state within a very short time. Iran had been stopped for the present, but Iran has the capability of becoming a nuclear power anytime. So this is a situation where power, all other elements of power, become secondary to the fact of the possession of nuclear arsenal. However, attempts are being made to contain these arsenals, to destroy some of them. Weapons of mass destruction cannot be used by sane humans, but in a war situation, how many people remain sane? How many states can remain sane? So there is always a danger, a very present and immediate danger of nuclear holocaust. The balance of power system had sought to be theorized by many. During the 1930s and 40s, we have seen a great debate between the idealists and the realists. The realists who developed in the United States in 1930s and 40s. Niebuhr, a radical theologian, was the father of the realist school of thought, ably aided by George Kennan and a Jewish immigrant lawyer, Hans Morgenthau. The idealists like Woodrow Wilson, they placed their bet on collective security. They have seen the failure of the balance of power system to keep peace in the world. So, they insisted that the League of Nations should be founded on a principle of collective security. The UN which followed is also based on the principle of collective security, which means that the great powers together will face the aggressor to bring peace to the world. The idea is that the great powers will act unanimously on this effort. But these great powers are never unanimous. They were never unanimous in the League. They are never unanimous or seldom unanimous in the United Nations because they themselves are caught in a balance of power situation. The idealists argue that man is also unselfish, man is also forgiving, man is also capable of cooperation. They point out that the states can still cooperate to hold on to peace. But the realists like Morgenthau or Neighbor do not accept this argument. They argue back that in this situation, only power is the answer to power. Only power can limit power. So, for them, the balance of power is the only theory in international relations which can explain the ground reality. It is true, the balance of power neglect some of the global questions. They neglect the forces of globalization which is bringing the states together against their will sometimes into a cooperative framework. They neglect the global questions of hunger and poverty. They neglect the global question of discrimination of women and children. They neglect the global spirit, the global desire among general people for peace and harmony. They neglect many other trends in international politics, like the integration of the regional states, the rather successful operation of some of the branches of the United Nations. They only highlight the failure of the Security Council, but never emphasize the relative success of the UNESCO and other branches of the United Nations. People can cooperate, but whether they can be brought together to cooperate for peace and in what manner they can be brought together is a question where the peace-loving idealists are still trying to answer. It is true that all the swords of the world are not immediately going to become plowshares, but the hope for peace is deathless.